You've got a long history of investigative journalism, particularly on the National Times and also as a professor of journalism. More recently, I guess, you created a blog or website, wendybacon.com. How did that come about?
I think when I knew that I'd be like going into semi-retirement, I guess you could say, I knew that I wanted to keep on doing journalism, but not in a full-time paid capacity. So I thought, and also I thought, whatever I want to publish, I want to publish what I want to publish. You know, I really, not that I don't think there's any role for editors, in fact I think they're pretty important, but now I really want to know that I can publish without constraints. And obviously I still follow the MEAA code of ethics and strive for accuracy and all that sort of thing, but I really want to be free from restraints. So that's really, I think, why I started the blog. And then I found myself going in certain directions, you know, once I got it going. And also it did mean that if I published on another site, for example, back then New Matilda was publishing, I would also put it on my blog, just so it would be there for at least the foreseeable future.
How many subscribers do you have and how are you funded?
Well, I fund myself in the sense that because I have enough super, I'll be quite frank about it, not like the millions they're talking about now, but I have enough to live on and I have a home to live in. So really, I mean, it doesn't cost much. Of course, you know, it does sometimes mean that the standard of the editing is not as high, but I have friends who pick up any typos and that sort of thing. So, and I have, I did pay someone to help me set up the current website and my and to get that going for me, and I learned how to do tags and all of that. So, you know, just basics. It's really not a lot of money at all. I mean, almost none, I would say, other than my time, which of course out in the real world of professional journalism, time is quite costly and it costs quite a lot to hire a journalist. Some people might sort of wonder about what I'm doing, because potentially by doing what I'm doing, I could be actually replacing the job of a paid journalist. But generally, the sort of thing that I do and the sort of stories I pursue are not ones that anyone, they're hidden stories, if you like. They're stories that won't get published, and they're the ones I tend to focus on. Like, I don't try to go into competition with other journalists who are doing it full-time, can do a much better job than I could just in my own time, a few hours a day. So that's, that's how it operates at the moment. And you asked me how many subscribers I have, and I have to say, I don't have a lot of subscribers. They're certainly under 1,000. But then that doesn't mean that's all the people who get to read my website, because one, it has a really good search engine, so people will pop up with stories well after they've been published. And so, you know, I put it on Twitter, I put it on Facebook. Sometimes if I think it's really important, I'll just email it to a very long list of friends who won't mind getting it. And so, you know, it's there. I think it's more like it's durable. It's not just who gets to read it the next day. It's actually there for a while.
And what kind of issues generally do you cover?
I got involved in, very interested in the issue of WestConnex, a massive project. But rather than sort of try to focus on the whole thing, I particularly started looking at air quality. And what I found is it's possible, you know, with the skills of a journalist, and also in my case I do have some legal skills and interest in environmental issues, I could with time get on top of these EISs. But most members of the public, EISs, I should just explain that, it's Environmental Impact Statement. These are done by consultants. They will be thousands of pages, very complex data that often boils down to not a huge amount, but nevertheless is so daunting for communities. And I became really concerned that because all the big consultants can be hired by the developers or the infrastructure developers in this case, or the government, really the community can never really, other than sometimes through councils, get access to any expertise. So I started at least trying to make publications that would make the documents more transparent. And then actually with my son and another person called Hanari Dagan, who is a data person. They've created public right to know websites, that sort of thing. We started scraping some of the air quality data. And then we were able to show stories that would never otherwise get done, like the fact it was exceeding national daily standards on quite a number of occasions in various areas, and also, in school hours it was higher, worse the air quality. So little things like that may be little stories that the rest of the media aren't going to do, but nevertheless important information for the community at that time. So that got me interested in how I could sort of pursue my interest in environmental journalism.
How much impact do you think a lone reporter can have working for an organisation?
Well, I guess in that case I was sort of working for the community, you could say. And out of that we formed a small organisation called Community Environment Monitoring, which has got retired environmental scientists, some retired journalists, data journalists, but very small. But you can have an impact, and I'll give you an example of that. For example, right out of Western Sydney, where there is almost no proper local media, no accountability, very little mainstream media, there are massive problems with the waste industry out there. So my stories on that issue, which have been following up with very big companies that are practically unaccountable altogether, just following up with that, it's disappointing sometimes that the rest of the media don't take it up, but I think partly it is about, and I've always believed with journalism that information does empower people. It at least gives people some basic material to go on with and to be able to ask the appropriate questions. So I would say it can have quite a big impact, but not on the sort of scale that a major investigative story would have.
So you're a journalist, but also you call yourself a political activist. And most mainstream journalists would think they're incompatible. How does that work?
Well, certainly it could not have worked when I was working for what was then Fairfax 9 Media, or when I was working at SBS. And I think wherever you are as a journalist, you certainly adapt to your circumstances. I don't think it's so much the case now, but back in the 20th century when we were doing journalism, you really did have to mask your own opinions. These days, even in mainstream media, that's much less so. Now, how I see it, Bill, is that, say, something like WestConnex, I am an opponent of that project. I think it's not a solution to traffic, and it's damaging for the community. But anything I do, and actually it's almost anything I do, because I've never been really into propaganda, even good, probably, like we could say, for good purposes, I always just strictly follow the MEAA Code of Ethics, so accuracy is really important. I do make sure that if there is arguments on the other side, that I acknowledge them, and I think that's also important. And then I will declare where I'm coming from at the bottom of the article, and I have a sort of something on my blog explaining that.
Some of the companies you're targeting or writing about are global, national type corporations. Are you concerned about about defamation laws? How do you guard against being sued?
Well, look, I am concerned always about defamation, and I have had what's called letters of concern now, where they send you a letter making certain claims and then wait for you to cave and apologise, hopefully not have to pay them any money. And I haven't had, I have had a couple of them over the years, and I have just, because I've been confident in my ground, I have continued. I am in a little bit of a different situation than somebody. I know another person in my situation who once published a small magazine and had to close down just because of the anxiety about defamation. I'm actually in a position, Bill, of not owning any property. So, and I haven't, it's not like a device I've engineered, this is an actual ongoing situation. So I'm probably not as vulnerable as some people. I think other people might be more worried. But also, I mean, what some people don't realise is with big companies, like Macquarie Bank, for example, if there is an organisation, at least in current circumstances, with more than about, I think, 25 employees, 25 employees, you can actually, once guess you couldn't. Once there was a situation, I remember with the ABC doing something about Alcoa, and there was a major case, and you could defame a company, but at the moment you can't. So I'm pretty careful with names. I'm not throwing names around. And again, that probably means at the end of the day, my journalism that I do currently is more, I would say, very much in the public interest. It can be relied upon, but it is not going to, let's say, win a Walkley or something like that.